get started, I said, this is the February. We're going to go through June, I guess, this time, and we'll have one each month. At the end of the meeting, I'll talk about the next one that we're going to have. But it's our goal simply to get input from you and to help share what we think is important for us to understand to maintain the sustainability of our community and our creeks and our rivers, our lakes and our bays. And that's what we're here for. That's what we intend to do. And with your help, we'll do it. So my co-president is before you there, Deborah Wymore, and I wanted her to say a few words. One of the things that Woodlands Green does every year and has for a long time is award scholarships to high school students that we think and believe and see are interested in this kind of business, this kind of work, this kind of education that would lead to jobs that would improve, maintain, and help our environment. Each year there's a contest, and I guess we've done 3, Deborah, scholarships.
We've done, as actual scholarships, 4 or 5 in recent years, but this is our 16th year. John Geiger is our scholarship coordinator. And just a brief announcement, go to the woodlandsgreen.org website. High school seniors are eligible. That's the Woodlands and surrounding areas. And the application is downloadable. Most of the area counselors and a few science teachers are well aware of our program. And between now and March 31st, we hope to hear from the high school seniors that have environmental career plans, and certainly many of those that have given so much of their volunteer time to the environment, scout projects, Woodlands Green Ambassador, number of organizations or individually committed to the environment. So check it out. It's applications online quite easily. The instructions are there, and John's got his contact information. Also wanted to mention tonight, and it's hot off the press, the Dragon Circle is a newsletter that our organization has put together close to 30 years. And it's published twice a year. In the spring, it's electronic format only, but it's jam-packed this year. We have 16 different articles and all kinds of interesting links to check out in this spring's Dragon Circle. And it just came out on Monday, and urging everybody to take a look at it. It's also on the website, can't miss it. Homepage, smack dab, downloadable, and you'll learn a lot and want to investigate all the different articles that we've got published there. So with that said, back to you, Paul.
Thanks so much, Deborah. And I said, that's a number that I'm proud of. We had been doing about 3 a year scholarships, and then we've been fortunate enough with help from all of you to increase that over the last 2 or 3 years. And so very proud of that, as well as buying books, environmentally related books for the library. So there's a lot to learn if you'll go to our webpage. And I like to say that my understanding of this organization is there's someone on this board or in this group that is interested in what you're interested in. So I'd like you to try to come with us and learn, and then help us make this mission possible. So I have nothing left to say except that, again, Erin's here. Erin Kinney is going to talk about the Galveston Bay Report Card. I said Galveston Bay is very meaningful to me. I was born in Galveston, Texas, and I was raised in Lamarck, Texas, just up the road, and I spent a lot of time in Galveston. Some of it to my father's chagrin. He wasn't that happy to have me down there sometimes, but I spent a lot of times on the beach. I spent a lot of time in the bay. I spent a lot of times fishing from the various rocks and things that do the Gulf and the Bay. And I think we forget how sensitive the Bay is, because it's there, it's been there, and it seems to be okay, but we've got to keep an eye on it. And that was the purpose of this study. So Erin, I'm not going to read your bio. It's enviable. Just a masterful accumulation of education and experience that you've had. So I'll ask you to go ahead and share the screen and tell us about our bay and how we did last year.
Okay.
And that's Deborah and Dennis being solar. Is it coming up?
Yes, it is. Go to presentation mode. Hopefully.
And yeah, before you get started, I wanted to tell everybody, I forgot to say that if you have questions, if you would, or comments, put them on the chat for me, and I'll try to look and make sure that I catch all of them, and we'll make sure we bring those up at the end. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you all for tuning in tonight. My name is Erin Kinney. I'm a research scientist at HARC, the Houston Advanced Research Center, and my specialty has been ecosystems and land use change and how our human activities on the land impact rivers, estuaries, and the ocean. And I'm here to talk about the Galveston Bay Report Card, and really to focus on how we have been adjusting, just like everyone else, to the realities of 2020. So just to set the stage for what the report card is, it's part of a larger Bay information framework. And this is a lot of the work that HARC does is really with data and bringing data to people who make decisions, to the public, to policymakers, to managers, and also to other scientists. And the Galveston Bay Report Card is a perfect example of one of those projects. HARC, located here in the Woodlands, we focus on air, water, and energy research with a special focus on sustainability and resilience. And I'm part of the water group. So we've been looking at data relating to our rivers, our bayous, Galveston Bay, the Gulf of Mexico for many years. And those data sets, those peer-reviewed literature papers, the gray literature, the agency reports and websites, those form the base of this pyramid here. And all of the products that we produce above that, that are aimed more and more towards the general public's understanding, and they distill a lot of that information and strip away some of the details to really get at the heart of what we're trying to communicate. And at the very tip of this pyramid is the report card. So that is the project that has, we hope, the highest level of public understanding, but the lowest level of detail. But what's important is all the information that goes into that is exactly the same for everything else that we do. So the data are not watered down at all. We just want to make sure that we're communicating in a way that's a little bit more straightforward and easier to understand. The report card itself is the first of its kind, easy to understand grading system to communicate the health of Galveston Bay to the public. We first released it in 2015, and we have had a release every year since then. And we've been focusing on 1 year at a time, and I'll get into why in just a minute. But the whole idea of this project is that we use the public interest combined with regional data sets to shape this report each and every year. Usually when people, usually when scientists set out to do this kind of a project, we start with the data. We know what data are out there. We know generally what people want to know, and we just get to work and start analyzing. And then we come up with some reports and maybe a website and presentations and go out to the media and present to the public. The report card didn't start that way. We started with the public. We went straight to the public with presentations to community groups. We went to Rotary clubs. We went to groups that live along the Houston Ship Channel. We went all over the place and talked to people about Galveston Bay and what they wanted to know about Galveston Bay. And then we did a whole bunch of surveys for people that we couldn't talk to in person. And from that, that's how we came up with a list of questions that eventually became our indicators of bay health. And then we went to the data, and then we analyzed it with the same rigor that we always use. And that's when we created the report card and the website for sharing. But the important part is that we then went back to the public every single year to check in, to see what else they wanted to know, what we should add, what isn't clear enough, and how we could make the report card more impactful to their lives. So it's been quite a ride since this began. The way the report card is set up is that we analyze the most recent complete year of data. So when the 2015, the first report card came out, it was actually looking at 2014 data. And in that first year of data, we had the Texas City Y oil spill. This, many of you will remember, was a pretty big deal. It was off the Texas City dike. There was a huge effort to contain the oil. There were a lot of dispersants put into the water. There's a lot of issue with oil accumulating on jetties and how was that going to be cleaned up and what was the long-term impact on the wildlife, and dolphins were getting lesions, and all in all, thankfully, most of that settled to the bottom, and we haven't seen many population level negative impacts from that spill. The next year in 2015, we had the Memorial Day flood. So 12 inches of rain in one day. The year after that, the Tax Day flood, which was even bigger, 17 inches of rain in one day. And plus another oil spill. 2017, of course, we had Hurricane Harvey. Broke every record we had. The year after Harvey, well, that was the first full year of data post Harvey, because Harvey was at the end of the year. So remember, this is a whole year's worth averaged. And then finally in 2019, this most recent one, we had the Kirby Inland Marine Oil spill. So we've had a lot of stressors going on Galveston Bay. And that's been recorded in all of the indicators. When we met with the public, we came up with a list of questions that gave us first 26 and now 33 different grades across 6 categories. But every year we average that, because a lot of the first thing that people ask us is, well, what's the average for the Bay? Well, if you average 33 grades of anyone's report card, chances are you're going to end up with a C, and that's where we ended up. Year after year after year after year. And the C grade I'll get into in a minute. We've want to clarify that what a C grade means for the Bay is that the conditions in the Bay are adequate for now. The Bay is faring well, considering the significant challenges that it's facing. Challenges like habitat and shellfish declines, pollution, the impacts of coastal change. But even after Hurricane Harvey, that brought so much fresh water into the Bay that saltwater species, if they could get out, did. We had catfish down at the mouth of the Bay. It was 0 salinity down at A&M Galveston. Still got a C. So it really showed us that today's Galveston Bay is resilient, which is incredibly encouraging and really indicative of the fact that it is a functioning, reasonably healthy ecosystem. But really, that's only part of the story. So to get at what's going on within the Bay, you really have to look at the grades. So in 2020, we have now 33 grades across 6 different categories. And this year we've added some new data, potential oyster habitat, and we got some new wetland grades. So we're excited to be able to incorporate those. But with all of the data sources that we have, and they're listed here at the bottom of this slide, we realized that we've got issues with scale, we've got issues with frequency of sampling techniques, different thresholds, different methods of determining whether something is good or bad that have been developed over the years by scientists in different organizations and agencies. We realized we needed one cohesive grading system for this report card. And so we settled on the classic A through F grade system that most people remember from high school, but we also had to remember that, you know, an A means something a little different to everyone. To some people, when they think of a grade of an A, they think it's 100%. To other people who are used to the bell curve, they just know that if you got an A, you did better than everyone else, even if you only got half right. So we needed to come up with qualifiers for each of these, and that's what the descriptors underneath mean. So if an indicator has a grade of A, that means the conditions of that indicator are excellent. B, they're good. C, they're adequate for now. And that, as I mentioned earlier, really means that with the status quo, it should be fine, but if anything changes, it might not be good enough. D is requires action. And that wording is also very specific. I'm going to get into one of the goals of the report card in just a minute, and that is really to encourage people to take action. F is critical, and then we added another grade of I for insufficient data. And we did that because there were questions that we couldn't answer. There just aren't enough data available for us to give people a real answer as what's going on with that indicator. But we wanted to show the decision makers, the scientists, the people who give us grants, that the public really wants to know this, and we can't answer them with the information that we currently have. So here is the 2020 summary card. The report card itself is a website, and I'll be showing that in just a minute, but this is a summary of the grades. And if the square is colored, that means the grade changed in 2020. So if you start at the top, you can see we have 6 categories: human health risks, habitat, water quality, coastal change, wildlife, and pollution events and sources. So human health risks answers questions like, can I swim in the bay? Can I swim in the bayou outside my house? Are the fish safe to eat? These are the kinds of questions we were getting from the public. And so the grades have pretty much stayed the same, but what we found is that the recreation safety, so that answers the question, is it safe to swim in Galveston Bay? That went down from an A to a B. And we know from looking at the data that that's driven by 2 particular beaches on Galveston Bay. And we're not entirely sure what is causing those beaches to have such high bacteria levels. But it has flagged it for us as something that needs to be investigated. And that's part of the purpose of the Galveston Bay Report Card. It's to identify things that need action to be taken. So as we go down, we'll see habitat. This includes wetlands and underwater grasses and oyster reefs. Water quality is nitrogen and phosphorus and dissolved oxygen. Phosphorus is one of the grades that actually improved. It went from a B to an A in Galveston Bay, and that's really good news because what water quality is answering is the bay healthy for organisms to live there? Fish and oysters and birds, and is the bay sufficiently healthy? The water itself, is the water clean enough for the fish? That was the kind of wording that we were getting very often. And so overall, yes, the water quality in Galveston Bay is good. We also have individual grades for each river and bayou. So I'll get into in a minute how you can break those down. In the category of coastal change, these were the questions we were getting from the people, the public, like, is there enough fresh water going into Galveston Bay? Is the sea level rising in Galveston Bay? Is the water temperature getting too warm? And so we use winter water temperature because that matters a lot. That's usually when the bay is the coldest. So when that gets warmer, you stop killing off invasive species, for instance. Is the bay getting too acidic for oysters? So we look at pH. These are the kinds of questions in coastal change, and those grades have largely stayed the same. Sea level rise is still an F. That's a combined sea level rise, so that includes subsidence as well as global sea level rise. And Galveston, at Pier 21 in Galveston, we have the second highest rate of sea level rise in the country. So this is definitely an issue, and things are not so slowly going underwater. There's significant incidents of what they call high tide flooding in Galveston, where it's not a spring tide, it's not a particularly stormy day, it's just a really high tide and the streets are flooded and often impassable. And that's becoming more and more frequent, and that's impacting their infrastructure. Wildlife answers questions like, are the fish that I like to fish with my grandson still going to be there when he grows up? And so we monitor a lot of different shellfish and finfish species. We're also looking at bird species, and we're looking at invasive species. And finally, pollution events and sources. This is where we have things like what's going on with pollution in the ship channel. So we look at toxic metals and organic toxins in sediment. Also oil spills, and finally litter and trash. So all of these are analyzed and graded every year that we have new data. So it's quite an effort. And you'll see down there in oil spills, there's an F, and that's because of that spill, the Kirby spill, which was a very large spill. We have 2 grades for oil spills, actually. One for volume of spills, which will capture a large event like that, but also one for total number of spills. You have to remember, we have thousands and thousands of vessels going up and down the ship channel every day. And so every drop of oil that spills into Galveston Bay needs to be reported. And if every vessel spilled a little oil, that would add up to quite a bit. So we're looking at the number of spills as well. And luckily that number has not gone up recently. So what's new in 2020? I mentioned the water quality grade had improved. Also, the shellfish grade improved, and that is due to blue crabs. We've been watching blue crabs for years, and their populations have just been tanking. They've been doing terribly. And for the first time, their populations didn't go down. So I wouldn't say that it's really stabilized yet, but it looks like it may be stabilizing. We need to see a few more years of data in order to really know for sure. We did have that oil spill grade of F for this big spill in May. And we also now have wetland grades. We hadn't been able to update them for a couple of years because NOAA's analysis team had some sort of hang up with getting the 2016 land cover data out. So we finally got those, we analyzed them, and I'll be talking about those grades in a minute. And then the oyster habitat is still an I for insufficient data, but we recently were allowed to preview some of the potential oyster habitat data that Texas Parks and Wildlife has been working on pretty much since Ike. So this was very exciting, and we can't wait until we can really dig in and release a grade for that as well, but they're still working on that final report. So one of the unique things about our report card is we really want to share as many grades as we can and on a watershed scale and context. A watershed is the land surrounding a body of water on which any drop of water that falls on that land makes its way into that body of water. So the actual watershed for Galveston Bay is enormous. It goes all the way up the Trinity River, north of Dallas and Fort Worth. It's huge. It's too big to even consider for outreach. So we shrink it down. We focus on the lower part of the watershed. And we then divide it even further and focus on the individual tributaries going into Galveston Bay. And that's how we like to talk about it, because that's a much more local feeling. So we created a Find Your Watershed tool, which is on the website. And what it enables you to do is just click on a watershed and you'll get these grades here. A freshwater wetland grade, dissolved oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and bacteria for each and every one of these. And then when you go to the individual indicators, you'll see a map that shows the grades and color coding. So this is bacteria, and this is for the entire lower Galveston Bay watershed. And where it's gray, it means we didn't have enough data to actually give an accurate grade. But for each of these, you'll see bacteria in these northernmost watersheds, subwatersheds is excellent. Spring Creek received a C. I know that there are areas of Spring Creek that are impaired and you're not allowed there's no recreational contact allowed. But as an average, the entire watershed scored a C this year. And then in towards Houston, you'll see lower grades as well. Here we have wetlands, and this is wetlands for 2016. This is the funny thing about some of these data. You don't always get them in a timely manner. We were very grateful that NOAA released their land cover satellite data from which we analyze wetland loss. And so we're really looking at freshwater wetland losses here. You can see in and around Houston, these all received Fs. There are no wetlands left. They've lost them all already. Luckily, up where we are in the Spring Creek watershed, we still do have some freshwater wetlands left. But again, this is a C. This is adequate for now. And unfortunately, since these are 2016 data, we don't really know what's going on right now, because between 2016 and 2020, there's been a lot of development in Spring Creek. So we are very anxious to see what the new data set will be. NOAA has actually announced that they're going to be speeding up that processing time. They had some kinks and errors that they had to work out. That's why the 2016 took so long. So we should get those soon. But right now, what we can do is we can compare all of these watersheds to each other and really see where the issues are in terms of wetland loss. And this helps conservation groups identify where they might want to focus their efforts. So let's say they had two parcels of land, one in the West Fork San Jacinto subwatershed and one in the East Fork San Jacinto watershed. All things being equal, the freshwater wetland conservation land might be more valuable in the West Fork because there are fewer wetlands available there. So I mentioned nitrogen and phosphorus go into those water quality grades as well. These are just examples of how things kind of shuffle out on a landscape scale. You can see nitrogen is low and really not an issue in Galveston Bay. That's very typical for this part of the coast. Phosphorus is a bigger issue, especially when you're in towards Houston. And actually in past years, we've seen some of these numbers even higher. So there's been an improvement in some of these phosphorus numbers, which is good news, but it's probably mostly tied to rainfall. But this nitrogen and phosphorus, very often you're going to see this coming from fertilizers and maybe from industry as well. And the nitrogen you can also see coming from septic systems. So we're watching all of these because these nutrients, when they get into bodies of water, act like fertilizer for algae. Great in the short term, you get an algae bloom, but then you immediately get an algae die-off and you can have low oxygen conditions. It can be bad for fish. It can be bad for invertebrates. So these are very closely watched for water quality. Another indicator that we monitor, and this is one of the examples of an I grade, is litter and trash. One of the most frequent questions we get from our public presentations is, what about trash? Whose job is it to pick it up? Whose job is it to monitor it? How do we prevent it from ending up on our beaches and our bayous and our creeks? And we started digging and we realized there is no regional data set that monitors litter and trash. The closest we could come up with was the Clean Rivers program that monitors for water quality. They agreed to start just noting when they see litter and trash. And that's what these orange pentagons are. Larger the pentagon, the more reports of trash on those Clean Rivers sampling reports. So it's something. It's not a complete data set. It's optional for the folks who are collecting those data. We don't get a lot of detail on what they actually see there, how dense it is, any of that, but it's given us something to work towards. And we've overlaid it with where the trash cleanups are in blue, especially those related to HGC's trash bash, because they're in the same place every year. So we're trying to provide this to encourage people to take action, to look in their own backyard and say, oh yeah, no, there's a lot of trash there and there aren't that many cleanups. Maybe I should start one, or where can I go to help make a difference and help clean up trash? And I'll talk more about some of the partners we work with on this in a few minutes. So I mentioned those grades that were new, and then we launched something else in 2020. We're calling it Mission 2020 Pollution Prevention. And this is our effort to provide a new lens to look at the Galveston Bay Report Card and to really help folks understand, especially in 2020 when everyone was stuck at home for so many months, that there are really so many things they can do and so many actions they can take, even in their own home, in their own property, to help protect our waterways in Galveston Bay. And in order to launch that, we created a new page on our website, as well as additional new video content. And we've reached out and we're really leaning into partners doing projects who are supporting the report card. So I'm going to talk about those next. So here's our mission pollution prevention page, and really this is starting out just this past year with some hashtags and some videos to really hopefully encourage people and inspire people to become conservation leaders in their own homes, in their communities, at work, wherever they feel as though they can encourage others to take action with them. So some of the video content that we created is background. We have one on what the report card is. Most of what I've already given you is introduction. What it tells us, so that digs into each of those indicators and the categories. Then we've got a 2020 report card grades presentation that digs into the grades. And we've got some other content as well. We've Sasha Francis is the community outreach coordinator from Galveston Bay Foundation. This is a joint project with GBF, the Galveston Bay Foundation. And essentially, HARC does the data, and GBF does the outreach and advocacy, because HARC is non-advocacy. And we share the presentations. But Sasha is the person I work with most closely, and she did a really great video on refusing, reducing, reusing, and recycling, essentially living more sustainably, and some of the easiest ways to start implementing that at home. It's really great. She's created some fabulous content this year. If we scroll down, you can see the What You Can Do tool that I'm going to present in a moment, as well as sign up for free presentations and workshops, because even though we're not going anywhere in person, unless we're outside and can, be safely distanced, she is more than happy to do virtual presentations at any time. So that What You Can Do tool is something that evolved over the course of a few years, really to inspire a call to action. We want people to feel empowered about the information we're giving them in the Galveston Bay Report Card. So often when you present this kind of information, the voice in the back of the audience's head is saying, all right, well, now what? What do I do with this information? And so we tell people what you can do. And as you're going through each indicator on the website, you will see a small list, like here in this orange box, of things you can do that will directly impact this indicator. But we also wanted to put them all together and create a tool with filters so you can search through them quickly. Let's say you've got an event coming up for a Girl Scout troop. You've got a bunch of kids, you want it to be kid friendly, you can check that off. Got about an hour, you check the hour off. It doesn't matter where, but you'd really like to focus on wildlife and habitat. And so you can check those two boxes and filter, and it will return to you a list of activities with links of ideas. And if you don't see what you like there, you can, search for something specific, or you can reset and just browse through them all. But we're trying to make it easier for people to become involved and to become conservationists and active participants in their ecosystem as in the easiest way that we possibly can. So some of the things for mission pollution prevention that really come to mind in terms of what you can do in your own backyard are easy and kind of straightforward, and some of them are less obvious. So one of the most obvious is litter and trash, going out and doing a cleanup. This is something that very early on, as soon as parks and were open and people were allowed to go out and about, we were hoping that people would be willing to do that. And in fact, this year, HGAC's Trash Bash is virtual. So anyone can do it at home and then report their data to HGAC, and you're part of it. And we are part of their service program. And we're taking this to another level. I'm going to be talking in a minute about how HARC is collecting the data from all these litter and trash collections and trying to create the data set that we need to create a grade. But moving on, pet waste. This is one that people so often forget. A lot of people don't think there's anything wrong with letting their dog go do his business in the woods or down in the drainage ditch. They think, oh, it's an animal, it's in the wild. They don't really think through and realize, no, I have a domesticated animal. They have different bacteria in their system. And also, there are way more domestic dogs than this ecosystem could support. So you can't really count it that way. And so it's something very easy that people can do to help protect their waterways and keep bacteria out of their waterways is pick up after their pet. There are things we can't control, like feral hogs and even cattle in some watersheds, but pets we can clean up after. Another thing we can control is fertilizer runoff. Either not using fertilizer or making sure you only use it exactly as you're directed to use it. So not right before a big rain and only at the right time of year and only the right dosage. But also keeping your grass clippings of fertilized lawns out of the storm drains is huge as well, because especially fertilized grass clippings, they are loaded with that extra nitrogen and phosphorus. So those get broken down pretty quickly, and you're just adding more nitrogen and phosphorus than the system needs. And finally, one of the coolest things that Sasha added is that she's got some resources on where to recycle anything. We're at a time, unfortunately, we're lucky here in the Woodlands, but in other places around Houston and Galveston, fewer and fewer recycling options are available. They're cutting the number of things that you can recycle. They're reducing recycling pickups. In Galveston, you don't even have recycling pickups. You have to drive it to a recycling center. So she found this resource and shared it, and it's really great. So I also mentioned video content. In addition to those 3 videos that we created specifically for the report card, Galveston Bay Foundation created At Home with the Bay. This is a virtual field trip series that they did last summer, and it is fantastic. I had the opportunity to participate in the Bay biodiversity one. So each one begins with a Galveston Bay Foundation staffer going out into nature. So for Bay biodiversity, Cindy Willems went out with a seine net and her daughters and seined up a bunch of fish and shrimp and then went through them, and the kids were having a great time, and she was holding them up to the camera and identifying them, and it really was like being on a little field trip. And then they had a segment with me. I was the biologist for the day, talking about biodiversity and why it's important on an ecosystem scale, and relating that to Galveston Bay, but also to the ecosystems around us. And the final part is an activity that another GBF staffer did with her daughter. They went out into their backyard and collected some examples of the biodiversity in their backyard. And what they couldn't bring inside, they drew pictures of and made a diorama. And it was a really educational, fun, engaging look at the ecosystem around us, but then relating it to our own backyards. And they've done that with wetlands, oysters, microscopic ecosystems, and plankton. And these are up and these are free to use. And they're doing more and more with this kind of virtual work with camps that are coming up. But these are all available now. And I really encourage you to check them out. They're a great way to kind of get the younger set engaged and interested in this kind of thing with a field trip that you can do from home if need be. And finally, we have partner projects. So one of the most exciting things about the Galveston Bay Report Card is because it's so inclusive and because we have 33 indicators and so many data sets, we really have so many more opportunities to partner with different groups and expand on those different areas. So one thing that I briefly mentioned is that HARC is working on a statewide litter database with Keep Texas Beautiful. And this is sponsored by the Garver Hillier Black Family Foundation. And it went from let's make a regional database to, oh no, let's go statewide, to let's partner with North Central Texas COG and HGAC and American Bird Conservancy and Gulf State Bird Observatory and their EPA grants and make this thing huge. So we are in the process of doing that. We're hoping to be able to release it for beta testing at the end of March. But one thing that we're trying to do is encourage people to collect data. When you go out and collect trash, if you can do an inventory, that's amazing. If you want to just say, I collected this many bags and the bags were this size, great. If you want to say I collected this many bags and half of it was recycling, even better. We are developing a methodology and an inventory sheet that should make it easier for people to kind of quickly assess what they're collecting. But we're also working on something called Take Two for Texas. It's a 2-minute rapid assessment, and that will be, we're still working out the methodology, but we're really excited for that. It would give people the opportunity to kind of go outside with 2 minutes of their day and just count what they see in terms of trash or bottles. I think we're leaning towards bottles. And that data in and of itself, if we can get more people involved, could really, really be eye-opening in terms of the extent and concentration of litter across the region and across the state. Another project that we're working on, oh wait, I wanted to show off. So that litter work is part of a larger effort with Partners in Litter Prevention. PLP, as we call ourselves, we're a consortium of nonprofits, government agencies, parks departments, academics, all sorts of different people who have one thing in common. We all are working to combat trash and litter and marine debris. And we came together for a trash summit over 3 years ago. And we've been working on a Galveston Bay Watershed aquatic debris action plan. It's nearly completed. We are getting ready to go out and seek endorsements from people like NOAA and the Gulf of Mexico program and the EPA. And we have a website, which is don'ttrashagoodthing.org. And we're having Trash Summit again this May, which is open to anyone who'd like to attend. And we are having subcommittee meetings. We're really trying to get ourselves out of the business of picking up trash and into the business of preventing it at the source. So this is a great example of people coming together as a result of some of the work that we started with the report card, but joining a larger community who is already working towards that as well. Okay, the next project is State of the Bay. And this is something that HARC just completed that uses the same data sets that are in the Galveston Bay Report Card, but instead of 1 year at a time, this is 35 to 40 years of data at a time. This is, I would say, one step away for public consumption. This is really more aimed at scientists, conservation managers, resource managers, decision makers. And this is part of the Galveston Bay Estuary Program's mission. They're required to do this every so many years. And we had the privilege at HARC of putting this together on a website and sharing it. And I wanted to show this here because I know very often there'll be folks who either, mentor students in the high schools or the junior high schools who are looking for science projects or are actually teaching there. And one of the coolest things about this Galveston Bay report, the State of the Bay website, is that there's a lot of in-depth written material. This started out as a book, and we've taken all that text and put it online. But then we've also got graphs. So the State of the Bay website is an update of the previous editions, and we had to go through and update all the data. And in doing so, we created an interactive data viewer. And I'm just going to briefly show that off. This is the Find Your Watershed tool, and Zoom is in the way of my menu bar. Here's State of the Bay. So under each of these tabs are entire chapters on, past human role, the history of Galveston Bay, habitat, fish and wildlife, invasive species, freshwater inflows. We have interactive maps, we have interactive graphs, we have a story map that talks about success stories of the Galveston Bay Estuary Program. But just very briefly, I want to show off the data viewer because I think that this is a resource that would appeal to a lot of folks. So we've got a tutorial that will go through it, but I just wanted to briefly jump in and show off. Okay, let's choose dissolved oxygen. And this is dissolved oxygen for the entirety of Galveston Bay for the whole record, so back to 1963. We've got average values here. The gray bars are actually the number of samples, and then we've got a linear regression. But the really powerful part is down here where we have filters. So you can choose either the bay or the watersheds. And once you choose watersheds, you can even choose particular watersheds if you're more interested in those. So let's say I do Barker Reservoir, Addicts, and then I will update. And now I'm seeing just those. And let's say I'm not interested in that many years. Okay, I can limit that too. And I can export this graph. So I've basically done all of this data filtering on the fly in the data viewer, and I haven't had to download anything. Now I can view the data here and copy and paste into Excel, or I can download the chart itself. And this is really a fantastic tool for anyone who wants to kind of dig more deeply into this. And this is just a sample of something that HARC is developing called a regional monitoring database, which is going to go all the way up through Montgomery County and is going to include even more data sets. But I wanted to make sure that y'all were aware of this because it just came out and we just finished it in December. So we're very excited about it. But this, as I mentioned, is really the professional version of the Galveston Bay Report Card. The Galveston Bay Report Card website, which I'll show here, is much more streamlined and much more public friendly. We have our grades here. These are our different categories. As you select each grade indicator, you'll have a brief description, the grades here, maps. These are saltwater wetlands grades. Saltwater wetlands are only located around the coast. That's why the color is like that. Of course, we have blog posts that we do monthly that are called cover stories. So we had a holiday sustainable gift guide, introduced Mission 2020, the Galveston Bay Report Card, and you can go all the way back and see all of the cover stories that we've done over the years. This is that What You Can Do tool with all the filters. And then, you know, select whichever you want. And then filter, and it will sort below. You can also choose by category. And then finally, the Find Your Watershed tool, where I can put in HARC's address, for instance. It will take me there. It will tell me which watershed I'm in. And then when I click on it, I get those grades. So that's really what we're trying to show people is how where they live or work or play is and how it's related to Galveston Bay. And then take it one step further and show them how they can get involved in preserving Galveston Bay. So as I mentioned with the state of the Bay, it's part of this Bay Information Framework. Here's the report card, the highest level of public understanding, the lower detail. The state of the Bay is much more detailed, but a little bit harder for the public to understand. And then the regional monitoring database, there's going to be a lot less explanation there, but much more just raw data. So stay tuned for that. That should be coming out in the next year or so. And then we have a couple of other things coming down the pipe. We've been working with Galveston Bay Foundation again on a survey of Galveston Bay residents, working with the UH Hobby School of Public Affairs. And they they virtually asked people what they thought of Galveston Bay, whether or not they recycled, whether they used reusable water bottles, whether they even thought about the Bay, whether they'd heard of the Galveston Bay Report Card or some of the other programs that GBF has. And it was really illuminating, and UH did a fabulous job, and we just got the draft report. We're going through that now. So we're hoping to be able to have a big release of that later this year. A couple of other things that are coming up is Galveston Bay Foundation does rain barrel workshops. I know we have them up here in the Woodlands. That's actually where I got my rain barrel, not through GBF. But if you have friends who live elsewhere, GBF does them all over. And they even have and a lot of them, they'll paint the rain barrels and make them look really pretty. But it's funny, in this latest winter storm, my friends at GBF who had rain barrels, when their water was turned off, they had this wonderful resource for water to flush their toilets. In the old Galveston homes, you don't always have a bathtub anymore. And so they really were so grateful for those rain barrels. They actually had enough to share with friends and neighbors. And so it was a kind of unforeseen extra of resilience in having this rain barrel there for a like, prolonged period of having no water in the house. As I mentioned earlier, Trash Bash from HGAC, their service area is absolutely enormous. Montgomery County is in it. It goes all the way down to Chocolate Bayou, even, I think. But this Trash Bash is a 1 day. They're doing it more than 1 day this year because it's remote event, and they give all of their data to us. So we use it for the Galveston Bay Report Card. We're using it for the statewide database. So the more people who get involved in that and report their data, the better. And we'd really appreciate it. And finally, I wanted to tell you all about something that you probably should have missed, but because of Winter Storm Uri, it was delayed, and that is a wetland walkabout. If you haven't heard of Exploration Green down in Webster, go to the State of the Bay website and check it out on the story map. That's State of the Bay, not the report card. In the story map, we go into what Exploration Green is. It is a fantastic example of a community and a water district and several precincts in Harris County and the Galveston Bay Estuary Program coming together and preventing the development of a defunct golf course and making it into a stormwater wetland. And they had barely broken ground when Harvey hit. But even with only a small portion of the first section dug, they managed to alleviate flooding in neighborhoods that flooded on just a regular rainstorm, much less an event like Harvey. It has made a huge difference to that community. Not only has it alleviated nearly all of the flooding issues, but it has become this gorgeous park. They built the wetlands, the birds showed up on their own. They thought they were going to have to add fish. The fish showed up on the feet of the birds. The birds brought the eggs with them. The fish survived. It's full of fish and birds and turtles. And they've got additional bluebird boxes and bat boxes up, pollinators galore. But what they don't have, which is amazing in Webster, is mosquitoes. The same Sasha Francis of GBF teaches an outdoor yoga class at dusk, if you can believe it. And there are no mosquitoes because there's so much around there that's eating them. So it's really, in and of itself, it's a wonderful park. And when the wetland walkabout is rescheduled, Exploration Green will be hosting it, and it will be a wonderful, safe tour of the wetland and the wildlife that are there. So that was a whole lot of what we are doing with the Galveston Bay Report Card now, because it's come into its own maturity wise. We have so much information to share, and we're just working on innovative ways to share it with more and more people. So thank you for letting me share it with you, and I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much. I think if you look at that state of the bay and you learn everything that's in it, I think you get a master's degree. I think. I really, really appreciate your presentation. And as I said, it was special to me. I think you mentioned that the bay is very, I guess it's resilient, you said, and it is, thank goodness. But I also would stress that parts of it are very sensitive, obviously. And I'm thinking of the oysters, I've been fortunate enough to be a part of several partnerships that talked about, and it used to be, we talked about the lack of freshwater inflows to the oysters, which caused susceptibility to disease, et cetera. And it seems like as many years as we talked about that, because, the inflow is important to the oysters and other critters down there. And for a long time, we had obviously things like the Lake Livingston Dam and others that stopped the flow down there. In the last, seems like 8 or 10 years, it's been too much water, which is also damaging. So I'd like you just to speak to that how sensitive the oysters are and what the status is now, because it pretty much got ruined by Ike and others.
Yeah. So Ike was a problem for sediment. What happened with Ike was with that intense storm surge, 17 plus feet in places. It brought so much sediment up into the bay and it buried a lot of the oyster reefs. And so it was after Ike that Texas Parks and Wildlife and some folks at A&M Galveston realized, we need to go out and we need to figure out where these reefs still are. And so they went out with side scan sonar and identified where those reefs were. But even as they were working on that project and getting funding to complete the bay, things were changing. New reefs were being uncovered, and being, and oysters were growing there. And so they were finding that they had to go and ground truth as well. So they had to actually go and see if the side scan sonar picked this up, is it really there? So it became a much larger project. That's why we were so excited to get some of those data. And in the midst of this, while we're waiting for all of this exciting oyster reef habitat data, we were looking at the oyster population numbers. That's now a grade that we include in the report card, that based on the sampling that Texas Parks and Wildlife does. They're not sampling, where the commercial reefs are. They're just going to the same spots year after year, month after month, to kind of provide that long-term data set in monitoring. And what they found is that after a lot of those freshwater events, the oysters bounced back. You had some loss, but for the most part, they did okay. It was Harvey that they were really worried about because the bay was fresh for weeks. And amazingly, most of the reefs recovered. There were a couple places that were really hard hit, but the rest of the bay seemed to fare okay. And that's an example of the kind of, it's not just biodiversity that you need, it's also habitat diversity, and you need spatial extent. And so one of the things that I like to remind people of too is, when you see that the Galveston Bay received a C, it's a big bay. It's a lot of averaging. And that's what you want in an ecosystem like that. You want it to all stay connected so that when Trinity River, the Trinity Bay area up in the upper lobe, is fresher for way too long, the areas in the southern part can help that area recover when things go back to normal. And so the bay circulation patterns are really important in addition to everything else.
Yeah, I was struck by that. Recall when you showed the whole area, and we think about what goes into Galveston Bay, including Montgomery County. But when you look at it also, you got to remember that service area that goes all the way up to Dallas and Fort Worth. So it's important to remember how big the area is, and everything that happens in there affects the bay. So I have a list of questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
There were questions about microplastics. So you didn't list that, and I know those are probably pretty hard to test for, but is there any work on that?
Oh yeah. So there are two groups right now working on microplastics, and we're hoping to include microplastics in that kind of statewide litter database that we're building. So USGS is doing one study, and they are sampling in both the bay and in several bayous. So USGS does a ton of water quality work. Actually, when we want to collect samples on our own, we partner with USGS and they do the boat work for us. And so they're out doing that, and USGS has a standard methodology for microplastics. And that's one of the big challenges of microplastics. They're so new that there's not one method. And I was at a conference a couple years ago, and they found out that their entire sample set was contaminated by the researcher's red sweatshirt. The fibers from her sweatshirt somehow shed and got into her samples, and it was wasted. And she had a, a lab sweatshirt that she wore, and that was enough. So yeah, it's really challenging to work with microplastics. Now, there's another group, Turtle Island Restoration Network is partnering with some students at UH, and they're going to be sampling in the same way as USGS in different locations. So they're going to get a bigger section of the bay by combining forces, but using the same methodology. And then we also have, Nurdle Patrol, which is what Jay's Tunnel started down in Mission Aransas. And that's when he's asking people when they're walking on the beach to count nurdles for 10 minutes. And nurdles are little nuggets of plastic that are usually melted down to make other things. But the way that they move them around the country is they load them onto box cars that leak. They're not used to, they're not really made for holding plastics. And so you get them distributed along train tracks. You get tanks that, blow over, or containers that blow open or are damaged or whatever. And so they're ending up all over the place, literally all over the place. And he has done an amazing job of creating a website where people can do this very simple act. Let's face it, when you're on the beach, 10 minutes is nothing. But we realized we wanted to emulate that when we created our Take Two for Texas protocol. We realized there's no way we could ask people to count bottles for 10 minutes. Because bottles are dirty, they're identifiable, they're big, they might be full of water, they might be full of something you don't know what it is. A nurdle is little and cute and looks like a grain of sand. So we've got a PR problem. But we love his method, and we love how widespread it is, and we're hoping to come up with something that's as shareable and as applicable to a large group of people.
Another question that comes up a lot. We know that many of our streams are contaminated with E. coli, and the question always becomes, is it human? Is it animal? Is it agriculture versus pets? And do you know what kind of tests they're doing? I guess you do. What kind of tests they're doing in the bay, or what that data says? And is there a way for to tell the difference between agriculture animals versus pets? And we know DNA, but that's a pretty expensive test.
Pretty expensive. Usually not. What they look for instead is evidence of one or the other. So, in Double Bayou, for instance, which was another watershed protection plan on the east side of Galveston Bay, they had cattle going right into one of the tributaries. So boom, right there is a source. They didn't anticipate the feral hogs being such an issue, but they are. And the challenge is, well, how do you keep those things out of the water body? And the cattle, you can put up a fence. The feral hog, good luck. But what you can do is keep the feral hog carcasses out of the water body. That's a much bigger source than just a sounder going through and every once in a while. But that's where we come to more urban watersheds, and then the fingers point to pet waste. I mean, dump trucks loads worth a day of pet waste. And so now, whether or not it comes from humans, there's still, those bacteria are just indicators. We are measuring the easy stuff as a proxy for the hard stuff that's actually going to make us sick. And so we have to remember that it's the other stuff that dogs and cats do carry that can make us sick that we need to watch out for as well.
Erin, thank you so much. I said it's inspiring again to me. I never grow tired of talking about the bay and water, and there's so much that we can do.
Thank
if we
you.
set our mind to.
Thank you.